We like to tell stories of the music industry as progress, as eras neatly replacing one another. But sometimes things don't really evolve, they break. 2013 was one of those years for sure. It was loud, it was overstuffed, it was excessive. And underneath all that spectacle, something fundamental stopped working. The old rules of pop promotion started to smoke, and the machinery stalled. Today, we're talking about the year that the playbook for promoting pop music burned. This is losing the plot. So I think that maybe I might actually start doing a thing where I talk about years in music, like do a calendar year top to bottom in music, because the more I work on episodes for this, the more I realize that the years that certain songs and certain albums come out, and this is pretty obvious, but things don't happen in a vacuum. So when a fundamental album comes out or a song that changes the course of whatever comes out, it usually comes out on the back of something else that has happened either the year before or in the moment that it happened. So 2013 is definitely a huge year for me. I could age myself and say that I graduated high school in 2013. So I think because it was such a fundamental year in my own personal history, obviously at that age you're experiencing the world with new eyes, you think you're an adult. So I was very, I would say, cognizant of what was happening around me in the world in general, and because of my love for music in the music industry as well. Also, I put up my first EP in 2013. So like in my own personal history, it's a very important year. But as I've gone back to look at the things that came out in that year, I realized that in pop music, it was such a busy year. It was the year of the albums that we're going to talk about today, obviously, but also Kendrick Lamar's Controversy came out that year. That was the year of Blurred Lines. That was the year of Miley Cyrus at the VMAs. Like there was so much happening every single part of that year. It was just feel like a year of endless discourse, and obviously social media was changing. The early users of Instagram and early users of Twitter, I know that that was also a year where things were very different on those platforms, and those things obviously affected how people were consuming music. And the year before 2013, I remember 2011, 2012 had been years where artists were really fighting with their music being leaked online. I remember that happened to a lot of artists where their music would get leaked online, and then they would either change their promotion schedule or the albums would not perform as well as they would have because of the leaks. So it was very chaotic year in music. But at the end of that year, one Beyonce Giselle Knowles Carter released an album that really changed how people would continue to put out music and engage with their fans. But before we get to that, I think it's important that we go back and we kind of revisit some of the things that happened early in that year. And because again, it's a year that is just jam packed with big name releases, I think, except for Rihanna, I think it's an important year. It's an interesting year for Rihanna not to have dropped, but for everybody else that was a pop juggernaut or that will become a pop juggernaut, they all had moments in that year. And I had a lot of options of people's whose records I could have used to facilitate this discussion, but I chose people that in my thinking, I don't know if this is right to say, but I chose people that are like in my thinking while putting this together were most in conversation with the topic of music promotion that year, and also I would say Beyonce's biggest contemporaries, which are Lady Gaga and Katy Perry. So for those of you that know, and for those of you that don't know, ARTPOP, which is a very important album in Gaga's discography, came out that year, and Prism, which I'm not sure if I'm correct to say this, so please check me if I'm wrong. I think Prism is Katy Perry's last real, I can't even say critically acclaimed, but probably commercially successful in the way that a Katy Perry record should be successful release. And that those albums came out in 2013, and those albums tell a there are two sides of the same coin of why music promotion in 2013 wasn't working. I'm going to talk a little bit about Kanye West on this episode today, not because, I don't say not because I have to, because I don't have to talk about him. But I think for the sake of conversation, as we look back into this year, I think him and the album that he dropped that year, Yeezus, are also good albums to facilitate our conversation. Now, I don't know if it's obvious, but I definitely am not a supporter of Mr. West's belief in recent years and how he's been carrying on. But we're talking about the era, we're talking about history, so we're going to talk about him in that history, in that context. I will make it as brief as possible when I get to talking about him. I just wanted to put that disclaimer there that for the sake of conversation, for the sake of driving the point in, we'll discuss users here a little bit. So this can also be a trigger warning to those to those that need it. I apologize. It's just it's kind of it becomes interesting when you have to talk about people because of their contribution to something, but are kind of removed from how they carry themselves in the years after. But history is history, fortunately or unfortunately. So we'll talk about promotion. So I don't know if I've made this clear yet, but on today's episode we're talking about how music promotion in 2013 changed with the release of Beyonce's self-titled album in December of that year. But leading up to that moment, to talk about why it was important that why music promotion was going to change. Because like I mentioned in my intro, we like to think about we like to think about music in perception as things that happen back to back and kind of seamlessly, but that's not always the case. Sometimes somebody or a couple of people are like, you know what, this isn't working, let's make that shift. We have yet to with streaming, obviously in 2026 now, with streaming, musicians have. I don't think we've had a defining moment of somebody changing how someone of like a big pop star status changing how we perceive music in this year. Yes, because streaming just makes things endlessly complex. But 2013 was definitely a big year for the change of music. I would say part of my thesis for today is that I think that 2013 was the last year where the traditional album rollout still worked as spectacle, strategy, and cultural conversation. Now let us start losing the plot very early on. Before we get to the thesis, let's start losing the plot early from here. There is an issue that big name artists are having. And I don't want to say only big name artists are having, but especially big name artists are having. I'm talking about people that have billions and millions of dollars of budgets to spend on promoting. And that issue is that we don't have one general mind as a culture anymore. Everybody has their own algorithm and everybody lives in their own space. So before our social media and our media consumption diet as a people became so segmented, we used to all have kind of the same algorithm, for lack of a better word. So we all, if someone dropped, we all participated in that conversation together as like a collective. And I mean, as a collective, I mean like the entire world. We all had gatekeepers. There were gatekeepers. There were articles, and there were music. If you were a big name, there were places you had to go. You had to do the Today Show. You had to do SNL. That there were things you had to do. Like, because we all had we're all receiving our information and our entertainment from the same sources, and there was radio, and everything was just so one mind. Now the world isn't as one mind as it used to be. And 2013 was, I think, one of those last years where we all had the same mind, which meant that if someone dropped an album that was of a significant stature, we all would have listened to that once, or we would all have reached us at the same time. But now the big name artists that drop music, and you're like, oh, that person dropped music when? I didn't know that they were on tour. I didn't know this, because it doesn't show up on your algorithm on your For You page or whatever. And because of that, it was easier to kind of see how well you were doing as an artist and how far your music was trending, how far it was going, because it was we all had one mind. Another reason why this one mind thing is important is because everybody was looking at the same places for information and resources and entertainment and whatever. Labels put a lot of money into rollouts, because if you are rolling out your music to the general public, you're trying to reach everybody in general public. But now that's not the case anymore. You can put out music now and put a lot of money into it, but it still won't reach everybody. Reach some of your target audience and some of your demography, depending on what intersection they stay at with other artists that they listen to. but it was just not. It was just a different time. It was a different time for that, and that becomes the core of why things had to change. Because in a year like that, and mind you, social media is on the rise as well. There's one mind, and we have these big artists. Everybody was putting out stuff, and everybody's release was an event. Every rollout was massive. Every artist was bigger than life. So essentially, someone is dropping an album in December, they start putting the album out from like March or April. And it's like, sometimes it would be like if you I remember there was app downloading exhaustion as well that time because almost everybody had an application, had an app for something that they were releasing, and everything was an event, everything, and there were so many people releasing as well because there was a lot of money being spent, and every artist was bigger than life, and things were just not connecting because it was a lot of noise. I think for those of us that were receiving, it was like there was a lot of everything's happening all the time, and we were being well fed, but it just felt really massive, and I think audience fatigue hit at the same time, and that culture of all those things together kind of changed everything. So we're going to break down four things. I think the things that we're going to break down in today's episode, we're going to bring out how the spectacle stopped working, how new rule books were written in real time, how streaming quietly, I would say, rewired the industry, and how all of this set the stage for the music world that we all live in now. And before I continue any further, I want to say if you're listening and you've listened this far, please, on whatever platform you're listening to, please subscribe, leave a comment. It genuinely helps the show travel, and I really appreciate it. Okay. Right. I've still not told you guys the thesis today. So I think the core idea I want to sit with today is that 2013 wasn't about hits. It wasn't even about great albums. It was about identity resets. Albums stopped being just collections of songs and became statements of how artists wanted to exist in this rapidly fragmenting digital world. Like I said, things were starting to get fragmented into algorithms and things of that nature very, very early on at this point. So for you to put out music that meant something that would travel far in 2013, your music had to meet the moment. And there were some artists whose music met the moment, and there were some artists whose music was ahead of the moment, and some artists whose music did not reach the moment, essentially. And I think for those artists whose music did not reach the moment, I think what happened there was that they misunderstood what the moment was actually asking for. And when you line up the releases in this order, you see that the industry was changing in real time. And I think, again, what 2013 reveals to me about music is that even in a year that's full of big albums and noisy rollouts, we had all this cumulating to, because my last episode was about 2014. All the albums last year in the last episode were about 2014. If you've not listened to the blueprint of a blockbuster, do yourself a favor, go listen to it. It was a great episode. So 2013 literally created the way for those albums in 2014. And I want to also caveat and say that this episode is not going to be about nostalgia or decision making at scale. We just want to talk about the unifying ideas that cut across this album. So the albums I'll be talking about today are Lady Gaga's ARTPOP, Katy Perry's Prism, Kanye West's Yeezus, and Beyonce's self-titled album, because it's called Beyoncé. And yeah, let us get into it. Let us start. I think I want to start with Gaga. And I think I'll start with Gaga because there was just, I remember, I was very alive and active in 2013. And I remember in 2013, Billboard also changed their chart rules, which was very interesting. They change their chart rules every now and again to decide what now counts for record sales and things of that nature, and which is why sometimes I think it's funny when people make such a big deal of their faves breaking like your Billboard record, because it's like the reason why your fave broke this Billboard record because now they added maybe they added YouTube views to it, or they added social media accounting to it. In 1996 or in 1986, your fave would not have been able to beat this record. So that also makes things interesting, where there are years that if someone's music had come out in a certain year, they would have gone platinum, but because it came out in whatever year, they are not going to go platinum and things of that nature. So which is another reason why we should not place too much emphasis on metrics or numbers when we are talking about music, because it literally depends on the year that your music comes out. In one year it could be top five. In another year, it won't meet the requirement to be top five. But I'll start with Gaga because Gaga's album, I think, of most of the people that we want to talk about here, was really highly anticipated. Because before, I think the album before ARTPOP was Born This Way, and she had, even from then, had made a huge deal about what this next record was going to hold and how it was going to be perceived and what it was about. And I think that one of the things that one of the, I think when we talk about ARTPOP today, we talk about an album that was ahead of its time. But I remember listening to ARTPOP when I got to listen to ARTPOP. I remember thinking I was expecting more. And I think that's one of the things that I think as an artist to take away is that sometimes when you overemphasize your album as being, this is going to be the thing that's going to change pop music, this is such a well researched this and that and the other, sometimes you talking too much about the record before it comes out affects its reception. I think Taylor Swift's Showgirl can be put in this category as well, where it just felt like because she had made so much and said so much about the themes of it and kind of promoted it for such a long time before it came out, there was almost no world where the album that she was going to release was going to meet those standards. It was just one of those things. And part of the explosion of 2013 was that people had this really drawn out rollouts before the album comes out, to the point when the album actually does come out, is like, even if the album is good, it just cannot match up the amount of hype you've put ahead of it. And Beyonce's, one of the reasons why Beyonce's self-titled did really well was because she didn't talk about the album before. December 13, 2013, World Stop, You Know Where You Were, she just dropped it. And that helped because we weren't expecting it. So it came off just far off the wall. And having a music video for every single song was also like next level. But just that thing of her being like, you know what, I'm not going to do a year worth of promotion. I'm just going to put out the music and people can experience everything at once and they can decide if it's good or if it's not. So I think that's why ARTPOP was misunderstood that year, because on paper it's insane. She had the Art Rave launch party, she had pop-up galleries in New York and LA, she had Jeff Koons structures, she had the flying dress, she had an interactive application, she had there was so much promotion. And I feel like where ARTPOP may have missed it was that there was a lot of promotion, but there was not a lot of world building, which is interesting because she was definitely trying to build a world, but all these things were just so big and huge in scale that it became just a lot. And while it was conceptually right, the problem was just the timing. I think that maybe if ARTPOP had come out the year before, maybe people would have been more receptive to it. But I think just that big budget, long rollout, multiple singles, interview everywhere kind of script just failed at that time. And obviously, like, since ARTPOP has come out, people have gone back to listen to it with new eyes, and the audiences have been like, okay, actually, I think we didn't understand it. But ultimately, she was either ahead of the moment musically and behind the moment promotion wise, and that affected the rollout and the reception of ARTPOP. And this was a year that, in that year people would have said that ARTPOP flopped, and that was a huge thing because it was like ARTPOP was supposed to be an event. It wasn't supposed to be just an album, and the promotional budget for ARTPOP was about $25 million. I'll let y'all sit down with that one for a second. Around $25 million to promote that album, not to make it. And obviously, it's debuted at number one when it came out, but then just in a week or two, there was like an 81% sales drop from number one to number 7. And just for an album of that nature, an album that, that had much money behind it, it was unfortunate. And I think everybody was kind of panicking in the music industry. Like, this was one of the biggest weeks of the year. But the lesson that we would have taken from that is that You cannot force a cultural moment with money. And I think that they, which is very interesting because Gaga is also known to be one of those artists that is very in the know with her fans, always talking with her fans, always conversation with them. But just the bigger and larger than life scale of the album and its promotion kind of missed the mark in that. So I would say that Lady Gaga's Art Pop rollout was not just elaborate. The other problem with Art Pop was that it was philosophically ambitious. So she had made this campaign about this is going to be the album about this is going to be the album that discusses the distance between pop music, fashion, technology, and fandom in a single ecosystem. And even the artwork wasn't just supposed to be a release party, it was supposed to be like a statement of intent. And it was just she had made a lot of talk about how this was a conceptual thing. And when you listen to the record, you're like, yeah, well, you're just kind of confused by it. I remember being confused by when I listened. I was like, what you've been saying about this album, I don't really, because a lot of songs about love and sex and things, and I was just like, and of course there's the art pop song. It's just like the songs felt simple in relation to the philosophy that she had promoted it with, and that was, I think, one of the things about art pop as well, where it was like, this feels not as complex and as tight and fine tuned as what you said we would get. And I think part of that reason is, I think dance music and pop music in the way that Gaga makes it has always kind of been misinterpreted a little bit. But that was the general feeling at the time, because like after this year-long promotional thing that we've done, this just doesn't feel up to the stakes of what we were promised. So that's Art Pop, and Art Pop came out in November of that year, I believe. So Gaga spent the entire album came out November 6th, 2013, and the first single off of Art Pop was in August, followed by October, where she released "Do What You Want" by featuring who we shall not be mentioning on here, and I believe the last single from Art Pop came out in 2014 March. So that was kind of that's kind of what I want to say about Art Pop. And the conversation around art pop in the year of 2013. Now let's move on to Katy Perry's Prism. Oh, Katy. I think Prism is so interesting because if with art pop, Gaga overreached, I think with Prism, Katy underreached. Just musically, Prism is such a mixed bag. I don't even think it's a bad album. It's just such a album. It's really safe in the choices. Now, of course, Prism is the album that has Dark Horse, and if you were in 2013, if you were up and moving in 2013, Dark Horse. Dark Horse was just. She had Dark Horse, she had Roar, so she did have these singles, and they were safe and they were of the moment and they were time. But the body of work itself would suffer from just being, like it was okay, like it was an okay album, and that was just not the year to have an okay album come out. The rollout for Prism was pretty clean. She had this Golden Truck reveal. She had a Pepsi partnership. She had, the Tweets to Unlock campaign. Can we talk about for a second how, thankfully, people have stopped using Twitter as such a core part of their rollouts? There was a time that, like, if a big name artist is putting on a song, there has to be like some type of laborious Twitter campaign around everything. The Tweets to Unlock, the threads. There was always something. I think artists use Twitter as a rollout campaign, but not as much as they used to go. Let me say 2016, 2017, Twitter and music promotion 5 and 6. Those things are there. And I think, again, one of the reasons why Prism is so confusing to me in retrospect is that there were hits on Prism, but I think Prism shows us that hits do not qualify eras. A couple of hits on an album does not a defining album make. And you juxtapose that again with Katy Perry's Teenage Dream. I think I would do an episode on Teenage Dream as well. Teenage Dream is just such a playbook on pop music release. It's just Teenage Dream, the record itself, the album, but also just the way it was rolled out is just such a masterclass on how to make a pop album and how to put it out and how to commit to it. But one of the major things that Teenage Dream had that Prism didn't have was that Teenage Dream not only met the moment, but it was also fresh. And sonically, what Katy promised us with Prism was an album that was going to be her Light After Darkness album. I could be wrong, but I believe that this happened after her divorce from Russell Brand. And there were a couple of songs, I think that By the Grace of God, and a couple of songs there where it's like, okay, I've broken free from the mold. But also, I think that one of the problems with Prism is that you can hear the mechanics of them trying to make an album that will sell, as opposed to just making an album that will be great. You can kind of see it in the production, especially. Just like I can feel the tinkering of, okay, this is, we'll put this in here so that the album will sell and chart like Teenage Dream did. And to be fair, Teenage Dream is an hard act to follow. Not many artists get a Teenage Dream, so I always feel bad for artists that have these larger than life successful albums, because like whatever you put next might meet the moments, most likely won't. But in a year when audiences were responding to bold pivots, Prism felt like optimization instead of reinvention. And that was kind of like a quiet danger for Katy, because it felt like Katy was struggling to reinvent. And she did reinvent a little bit. I think I would say that Prism is definitely a bit more calmer in tone and presentation than Teenage Dream was. But it wasn't for the audience. I don't think it was wide enough of a reinvention. Prism felt like a safe bet. Especially, I think Raw was the lead single. Let me see. Let me double confirm that. I believe that Raw was the lead single for Prism. And that alone was, Raw was the lead single for Prism. And if you were, right. Also, if you were in 2013, remember that there was a whole thing about Gaga versus Katy. It was even a Glee episode about being a Katy and being a Gaga. Oh my God, 2013 was such a fever dream. But these were the two big acts that, again, because no one knew Beyonce was dropping that year because she had not announced anything. So it was going to be like, oh, who's going to, whatever. Katy dropped in October 18 and Gaga dropped in November 6. I'm not sure. I think somebody moved their date for the other person. I could be wrong. But maybe it was because Applause and Raw came out around the same time. So Raw was the lead single from Prism, so that came out in August 10, and Applause was the lead single for ARTPOP, and that came out August 12. And there was a whole Katy versus Gaga thing that the stands were lighting on fire. I'm telling you, 2013 was a fever dream. Like, if you lived through that year, you've seen it all. Honestly, everything was happening all at once that year. And now I think that fatigue as well of having such a huge year in pop culture. I'm telling you, Blurred Lines came out that year, and was like problematic. And there was Miley Cyrus, Ariana Grande was coming up, One Direction, social media was social media in. Like, it was there was what was this challenge? This Harlem Shake, like, what wasn't happening in 2013? And I think because of that, again, it was just such a loud year that for your album to have, just to be fair to these artists, for your album to have broken through the grain of that year, it had to be self-titled. It just had to be something that was just so removed from the moments that we were having that it would break through, because it was just everything was happening that year. In all the quarters of that year, something magnanimous was happening, or had happened, or would happen, So it was one of those years, even politically, like, it was just such a crazy year. So Katy Perry's album Prism definitely didn't meet the moment. She underreached strategically. The music was safer. The rollout was safe. It didn't really move the needle as much as it would have needed to move in such a busy year. And even and I think what Katy Perry, unlike Gaga, who threw everything at it and just was a bit ahead of the moment, Katy showed us that if you follow all the rules of the old guard of how you were going to do things, you'll find out that you might still not miss the mark. Your reinvention has to be radical enough to meet the moment. Yeah. So in a year when audiences were responding to artists making bold and sometimes uncomfortable pivots, Prism did not do that. There was no real cultural recalibration because of it, and it's, you know, after Prism, Katy Perry's career wasn't the same. I don't even think she's quite recovered from that yet. I think it's always been this thing where she is either too late to the party or she's not pushing her needle, her pen far enough. But we love Katy Perry in this house. I want to say that. That is our girl, and we're rooting for her for the day that she comes back in all of her pop glory. Okay, now I'll talk about Yeezus a little bit before we get over to Miss Giselle Knowles Carter. You know, in a year where everything was happening, obviously there's Kanye. You know, in fact, Kanye releasing Yeezus specifically in 2013 is the most 2013 thing about 2013. Kanye's album felt like the opposite of a rollout, to be fair, which I think is again making the case for this was a year where things had to be done differently. Because I remember Kanye Yeezus doesn't have a cover. It was just a clear jewel case with red tape, which was it felt very anti-marketing and of the moment. It was also subversive. One thing that I think Gaga and Katy missed as well was like their projects were a bit like on the nose, and because of how noisy the year was, subversion would be power. And I remember there were the new slave projections, his editorial performances, even interviews became part of the art, and it was just it sounded like 2013. It sounded like the moment. It sounded subversive. It sounded, the album itself, which is here where I think Gaga missed the mark, was like the album felt up to the standard of disruption and chaos that he said it would be. I don't think ARTPOP sounded as as up to this philosophical standard that Gaga said it was going to sound like. But with Yeezus, I think Kanye really does meet the moment with his performance of himself and sonically, because even like on site is just such a dizzying way to start an album. It's like, what? There's new slaves. Like that album is just, the album is what it thinks it is in terms of what it says it's going to be and how it comes out. It's a hip hop album, but it borrows from all these very dizzying production. Black skin Ed's on here. I am a god. Hurry up with my damn croissant. But on the leaves, like, you know what I'm saying? It was very, and again, he was dating Kim Kardashian. There's so many things. There's so many reasons why Yeezus is probably the ultimate 2013 album. It's just, it meets the moment. The electronic production on Yeezus for a hip hop album to have that element of abrasive electronic music and synthesizers is just, you know what I'm saying? It was just so different and so subversive and so just out of anything you could think of that it worked. And the album the album itself is just submerged in that constantly. So, that's why I think Yeezus worked in the year that it came out. And yeah, just a show of an album that doesn't, that knows what it is and meets the moment. I think meeting the moment, album to artist to culture, is such an important thing. And there's almost no real way of knowing if you're going to meet the moment. You just have to make music that's genuine to yourself and hoping that one day everything will just lock in. And, because y'all remember that 2013 was the year of Thrift Shop. Thrift Shop came out in 2013, y'all. Kendrick Lamar's verse on Control. Like, you know what I'm saying? Meeting the moment is not something that you can really plan for, because you don't always know what all the other people are doing. But if you stay true to yourself and true to your art, and you push your pen and you push your paper, you'll be able to meet the moment. I feel like there's very little, not very little, but I think of ARTPOP and Yeezus in the same light, and I just think of one meeting the moment and one being ahead of the moment. Or Yeah, being ahead of the moment. Yeah, and not really a fault of the artist who was ahead of the moment. Just there's just no way you can know for sure. So the, I think I've used Gaga and Katy to show what didn't work in 2013, and I used Kanye to show what worked and what could be built upon. And just for reference sake, I believe Katy dropped first. Katy dropped in October. Gaga dropped in November, and Kanye actually dropped first. Kanye dropped in June, which actually does kind of further my point that Kanye dropping in June in the summer of that year with the way he wrote out the album and the way the album came out, that still in conversation, the fatigue was there, but I'm not sure if the VMAs had happened at that time yet. But very interesting time, very interesting place to have done things. But then later in the year, during the winter, is when Gaga and Katy drop, and I think the fatigue had really set in at that time. Okay, cool. Now, I think I want to talk about streaming a little bit. So we were still kind of understanding what streaming was. We're still understanding Spotify, and there was no Apple Music at this time for sure. We're just still understanding what we're supposed to do, and I think the music industry was also trying to understand itself. What to do with how to make money, because the key thing about streaming is that streaming cuts artist revenue from physical sales or buying things. It cuts it by a lot. And so this was also the era of, and streaming was also changing our diet as to how we consume the music as well, because playlisting was about to become on the rise, where someone will make a playlist for you and share it with you. As opposed to you listen to one album top to bottom. Now you had a playlist where you can put different songs from different albums, and you can pick a song that fit a vibe. And this will also later give room to the playlist in the background vibe. So I've made a playlist, but I don't want something that's going to interrupt the flow, so it's just going to play in the background, and that's going to lead us to an era of music listening where people don't know the artist, but they know the songs, because they know the song from a playlist or from a TV show they Shazam and know the artist from. So a lot is happening with streaming, and that is also definitely, again, Gaga and Katy are people who are suffering or suffered from this new undercurrent of streaming. But streaming is the year that the industry was having this reluctant marriage. The industry was had this reluctant marriage to streaming, but subscription and access-based revenue had grown nearly 60% the year before. So the shift was clear that ownership was going to be giving people more access to more options, and albums were no longer the product the attention of the audience was. So streaming changed how hits happened. Like I've talked about Thrift Shop earlier, but so a song like Thrift Shop did not rely on radio, because radio was the old guard. Radio was how you broke radio, you were fine. But Thrift Shop was a massive hit, and it wasn't a massive hit because of radio. It was a massive hit because of playlists. And to add to this conundrum was the fact that independent artists could now break through without the traditional gatekeepers. So not only were the established big names struggling and having a hard time putting their songs out, but now they were seeing all these newcomers coming with not as much capital or as much promotional money as they are, and making hits, because the hits were connecting with people online. Social media and streaming were changing things. So yeah, and I think if ultimately this would birth the algorithm, but that's way in the future. So now let's talk about the new rules. Let's welcome one Beyoncé Giselle Knowles Carter. Now, before we talk, for Beyonce's personal, how Beyonce gets to meet the moment with this album, the album before this is important. 4 is important, because before Beyonce released 4, she had fired her dad as her manager. She had taken some time off making music and touring for like the first time in her career, in a while, to understand the world, to get inspired. And she made this really very strong, I would say, R&B album. In my thinking, 4 is a very strong R&B album. I don't know if anybody's throwing tomatoes about that, but if you are, I'm sorry. So she made this really strong R&B album with pulling from different places as she normally does, but I would say a strong R&B album. And it was leaked, I believe, before it came out, And also Run the World Girls, I believe was the first single, and that wasn't received well. I think Run the World Girls, the song itself was leaked, and I think the music video, look, it was a mess. The four rollouts was a mess, and four didn't do as well commercially as one would have expected a song like for an album from someone like Beyonce to do. And Giselle, Giselle says bet. She kind of takes it in stride. She has her baby, right? She has her baby. Yeah, she has her baby. And she's like, you know what, bet. Lessons learned. And she starts to pivot. She starts to think, okay, now we're in this new era, and people want you to, and people, again, this is the year of over promotion and social media. So people are talking to their fans ad nauseum, telling them about their every step. And she says, okay, this is what the moment is right now, and this is where it's going. And she decides to change that. I think the first revolutionary thing that she does is that she goes on tour without, not on the back of a new album. She goes on tour to go on tour. Wild, a massive tour. She goes on that tour, and it's like, oh, because I remember, I believe the tour was announced after the Super Bowl, because she did the Super Bowl that year, and you're like, okay, she's doing the Super Bowl, she's going to announce a new album. Does not announce a new album. She announces a tour. She goes on tour. She puts out, I don't know if I think she put out on SoundCloud. She put Bow Down out on SoundCloud or something, but no, like nothing. And then she does commercials with songs that we didn't know if the song was going to come out or not. But all the while she's making this album, she's making self-titled, she's making a video for every song, and just going on her tour, not saying anything about it. And then, like I said in my intro, while some other artists were losing on us, we're losing under the old rules, some other artists decide to burn the rule book entirely, and that's what she does. So on December 13, 2013, she releases self-titled, no singles, no press, no warning. And that was radical at the time, because again, Gaga and Perry had just had these years where they flopped, and they had these massive rollouts and done all these things, and it didn't pay off. And not only does she release the album with no warning, every song has a music video. It was a visual album. So it was really like, if you put out music, like if you're supposed to put out music in January, I know that some artists who put out music in January were really affected by the surprise Beyonce drop. And because of this drop, because it dropped on a Friday, the new rules of dropping your dropping records started to moved to Friday rather, because of people don't know that the reason why we have New Music Friday is actually because of this Beyonce album. That's why we have it. And then I remember after this dropped, of course, 2014 or 2015, people started to do surprise album releases as well. I think the only person that really benefited from that was Drake's If You Are Reading This Is Too Late, because that met the moment in terms of the surprise release. But that would become a thing as well. People are like, oh my God, I'm going to do a surprise release. And people still do it till now to varying degrees. It's just not the same climate. A surprise release from a big name artist back then would have meant more, because everybody would have literally been gagged and at the same time. But now we have these algorithms. It's just not going to have hold the same weight as it did. But physical retail still made up over 30% of the album sales at the time, but she cut them out completely. So she really, really met the moment. So this was an album that came out, and I feel like one of the reasons why, this is my theory, I think one of the reasons why she cut out physical album sales, physical retail, was because of the leaks she had experienced with 4. So she was I remember they recorded, whenever she would record songs for 4, they would wipe everything from the hard drive of the studio where they recorded it at, and they whenever they would refer to the album, they would refer to it on the name Lily or something. So it was enormous. The risk was enormous for this. Also, she released for a while, you could only listen to self-titled on iTunes. It was a full visual album dropped exclusively on iTunes. So in so many ways, there were so many risks that were being made, but I think it translated because it didn't feel like a stunt. it had been a year of stunting from many big names as we've established, but it felt more like an artist that I wanted to control how the album was being perceived, and it also shows a level of care. Like, I care so much about how you guys receive this. I want you to receive it the way I put it out. I want you to receive this not as a playlist, not as a this, not a that, but I want you to receive it how I want you to receive it. These are the songs, these are the videos, all at once. So that was very, very. It made the album immersive, and again, I remember the first day. I remember the first day I listened to the album just from pressing play on Pretty Hurts and not knowing what to expect. That was just not something that you had that year. You had a year of people telling you ad nauseum what the album was about, who was on the album, what the record was. So this backhanded reverse release strategy was really effective in that year. And just, I remember from Pretty. And another thing, like I said, a point I wanted to make about Yeezus. One reason why I think Yeezus was so successful was because Yeezus was experimental. It was a big name artist taking experimental risks sonically, production wise. Self-Titled, I think, is probably Beyonce's most experimental album. You go from Pretty Hurts, which is like a pop song, to Drunk in Love, which is like a trap beat where she's singing on a trap beat, which is like, huh? Now, y'all don't know this, or some of y'all may know this, but like now it's very commonplace for an R&B girl to sing on a trap beat or a hard trap beat, but that wasn't always the case. I really have to credit Pour It Up by Rihanna and Drunk in Love by Beyonce as two songs that really popularized that whole thing. Now, if we take it even further back from that, we'll go to Mariah Carey, when Mariah used to sing on hip hop beats. But that was a huge precursor for the moments that Giselle and Rihanna would eventually hit. But yeah, one of the reasons why I think the album was also successful was because it was so experimental. You went from Pretty Hurts to Drunk in Love to Haunted to Blow to Rocket to No Angel. Just had these very different textures and a very lived in and fresh production, which is one of the things that I would say Katy's Prism did not live up to. Prism wasn't experimental enough, or wasn't experimental in this way. And then ARTPOP was experimental, but not in the way that we were expecting it to be, I would say. But yeah, so this move really changed how it changed because it was historic, and it changed how we would expect music in moving forward. Because it wasn't just a marketing trick. I think that's the most important thing I want to say about Self-Titled. It wasn't just a marketing trick. It was deeper than that. It was a philosophical rejection of the entire promotional thing, where like you have to spend all this money promoting to something before it comes out. What if we went back to the basics? What if we went back to the music and we made something that was cool and experimental and away from the gaze of the public in the year of social media, and even the iTunes exclusivity? Something about it being exclusive to iTunes. Again, a strategy that people would take in the years after and hit over its head to death. Because what making exclusive to iTunes meant was that I have so much faith in this work that I'm not even going to try to make it accessible to everybody. Yeah. You don't have an iPhone? You should get one. Because you're going to need it, because this is going to be an album that's going to be so great, so amazing, that you're going to want to find me where I am. I want you to come to me. I'm not going to make myself available to every Tom, Dick, and Harry. If this is your stuff, you're going to come and find it. Find me on iTunes. I'll see you there. That also was just very, at the time, very groundbreaking. Again, in the years that came after, people would take that platform exclusive thing and turn it over its head for various reasons. Sometimes with that, it's like you really have to be an artist of a certain caliber to do something as like making your music exclusive on a platform like that. But the original person that did it in a way that was very befitting to the theory and the philosophy of the album. So just have it. And again, she did this while she was on tour. So, you know, with Taylor's recent tour where she released Tortured Poets while she was on tour and added visuals and songs from Tortured Poets to the Eras tour. Giselle had done that with the Mrs. Carter tour, because Mrs. Carter tour was still very much, the machine was still going, she was still on the road, and while she was on the road, if you had seen the tour before the album drop, you probably want to see it again, because now she was adding songs from the album to the set list of the tour. So the tour was, again, Sabrina has done this with the tour that she was on for Short and Sweet, where doing the tour, she released Man Child. So again, the album is so groundbreaking in its impact on not just music releases, but even something like touring in the years that came after it. Okay, let's start to wrap this up, guys. So I would say that if 2014, I think that 2014 is a response to 2013. So the elaborate rollouts that we experienced in 2013 collapsed under their own weight. But Beyonce's success with Self-Titled, and I would say Kanye's success with Yeezus, shows us that the attention in the industry is finite. And the best way to command it is not by louder promotion, but by meeting the moment, which is, I don't know if meeting the moment is something that you can plan for. It's just something that kind of just happens, right? In my thinking, meeting the moment, or just having decisive authorship, like knowing your philosophy for the album and world building, as opposed to just throwing stuff at it. Also, one of the reasons why I find artists like Doechii and Sabrina Carpenter to be so compelling today is that there is a line where narrative clarity meets maximalism, which is like, you are committing to this era, but you are clear about the persona and what the era is about. Alligator Never Bites is a very clear and direct philosophy, and it meets the moment really well. Sabrina's, I don't want to call it a shtick because that seems very insulting, but Sabrina's dedication to this persona that she's building, this pin-up princess that she's building, is clear and direct, and it meets the era properly. So, because I will say this, like, I really enjoy an elaborate rollout. I really do. I enjoy elaborate rollouts. But I think that what 2013 shows is that surprise, cohesion, and authorship can outperform months of hype. So you can draw a straight line from this moment to how releases change afterwards, right? So you can still do the elaborate rollout, but if you're going to do the elaborate rollout, make sure that it's more seated in world building than just a bunch of random events that you're just doing to tell people about the album. With everything, like for the elaborate rollout, make sure you're bringing us closer and more into the world of the album, as opposed to just doing it to do it. So yes, like I said, strategy. I think another good example of this is Adekunle Gold's Fuji. I like how all the episodes are connecting, but Fuji is a great example of world building through rollouts. I would say that the rollout for Fuji was elaborate, but everything that he did in that rollout brought us closer and more into the world of Fuji, a world that he knew a lot about. So again, the artist's ability to know a lot about the world that they are in helps them meet the moment. Everything just kind of connects together in that way. Alignment between the culture and the artist and the time and the event and the intent, all of those things really, 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 really matter still. So again, like, I'm not against, like, I want to just make that very clear. I love an elaborate rollout as long as it's done with core care, intention, and belief in the album as an art form. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of today's episode. I really enjoy talking about things in relation to one another, because nothing happens in a vacuum. And talking about all these albums that I know so well and I listen to ad nauseum. Again, I listen to ARTPOP and Prism. Those albums, like, critical reception be damned. I was, whatever streams those girls were getting, I was giving them some of those streams. Yeah. And I would say that one thing about 2013, I would say in retrospect, is that 2013 did not destroy the music industry, but it forced it to grow up. The old gatekeepers lost power. That's radio, physical retail, slow structured rollouts, and certain media organizations. The control shifted from the artist, control shifted to artists, excuse me, and to algorithms. So the album rollout became more fluid, more continuous, definitely more data informed, and here we are, I think in 2026, still living in the world that 2013 created. Isn't that crazy? But yeah, that's the plot. If this episode made you think about how music gets made and marketed, please leave a comment. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you think. So I would like to hear from you guys. Tell me what you think actually broke first in 2013, or even what memories from 2013 you have, if you are old enough to have memories from 2013. And make sure, please, on whatever platform you're listening to, that you are subscribed and you're dropping the comments or following. It really does help, and this question does not work without you guys. Thank you so much. This has been Losing the Plot with Adeoluwa. Till next time, stay crowned.